I discovered that people have made documentaries about my kind. And when I say my kind, I am referring to Mennonites. I grew up Mennonite, and my parents are Mennonite, and so I am very familiar with Mennonites. And just like the Amish, Mennonites have also been really intrigued. People are intrigued by Mennonites, much like they're intrigued by Amish and other Anabaptist faiths. And I discovered while perusing YouTube that there are Mennonite documentaries. And not only one, but multiple documentaries about Mennonites. And I just think it's the funniest thing because I just find it funny that people find Mennonites so intriguing. What do people think about us, or how do people portray us within documentaries? And so I selected one by Parable here, as you can see. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of my thoughts and reaction as I watch this. And I'll cut pieces in and out and stuff and go from there. But what do people have to say about the Mennonites? Let's see.
I bet you're wondering why I'm up to my neck in corn.
I'm
here to learn about the Mennonite community. And I'm in the center of it. I'm going to have a chance to meet people within the community who are going to teach me more.
But here's the catch. Most Mennonites simply will not let their pictures be taken. Luckily,
so that's funny. He says that most Mennonites will not let their picture be taken. That is very dependent. I'm going to say this outright, right off the bat. When you say Mennonite, it is a very, very broad term. There are Mennonites that are completely different from other Mennonites, and they all fall within the Mennonite denomination. So, for instance, I grew up in a family of Mennonites who were not nearly as strict or as conservative as some of the Mennonites I think he's going to feature in this documentary. Because the ones that are most interesting to people are the ones that are the most traditional, most conservative. So he's going to be talking about their lifestyle because it's so antiquated. But when you say Mennonite, it's a very, very wide spectrum. My family grew up somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. It is a wide spectrum. But it's not true that every Mennonite doesn't take pictures of themselves. Most Mennonites I know do take pictures of themselves or have pictures of themselves or have pictures of other people. So this is just a very strict conservative Mennonite group within Ontario.
I tracked down 2 Mennonite teenagers who were comfortable with the camera.
Nice to meet you. Let's go inside. Yes. Wow. It even smells old.
So this church structure, my church growing up was not structured like this. But I did have grandparents and I did have some more conservative Mennonite people within my family where their church was structured kind of like this, or at least somewhat similar. So that isn't an inaccurate portrayal of how some Mennonite churches are structured. But these, again, are your more conservative, more, I guess you could say, modest Mennonites would have a church like this.
Being equal with others is central to how Mennonites live. Their clothes and churches are simple, their way of travel is simple, and even their grave sites all look the same.
Okay, that's a funny thing. So the Mennonite in this video, in this documentary, are traveling in horse and buggies. Most Mennonites I know do not travel in horse and buggies. Most of them drive vehicles of some sorts. Now, the ones who are more conservative in my area, they drive all black vehicles and they will not buy sports cars and stuff. They will just drive all black plain vehicles. But most of the people who you see riding horse and buggies in my area are Amish or something like that. So these are very old order Mennonites.
It turns out the term Old Order is what is used to describe the most religiously devout members of this community.
Mm-hmm.
Those who, to this day, reject the idea of modern technology, even so far as having no electricity or TVs in their homes, and who live their lives as their ancestors did centuries ago.
Is this just...
It is also true that the more conservative you go as far as Mennonites, it's like most religions, the more conservative you go, the more they shun technology, the more they stick within the past and stay antiquated. But in my case, growing up, we had a TV. We had electric. We had a car. It wasn't all black either. Growing up, we had most modern technologies. We had cell phones and all that stuff. So, again, Mennonite is a broad term, but in this case, it is true. The more conservative groups and the more conservative you get within these Mennonite circles, the less technology you have. And I know people within Mennonite churches that are part of my family, distant family stuff, that do not have TVs and things like that because their church don't allow it. But I grew up having a TV and stuff.
Just a Bible?
No, that's just a hymn book.
Oh, okay.
Songs that we sing.
Can you do something for me now?
Oh, okay. I have one here.
Okay.
That's quite familiar. So you'll see that there's no notes there. We just sing off of memory. I'm not sure if I want to do that. What a friend we have in Jesus.
Oh, I know this song. I like the song.
All our sins and grief to bear.
But I can't sing either, so I can't judge.
To carry everything to God
Sounds like
in
me.
prayer.
You're horrible.
You're terrible.
I know.
You're not-
It's all good. Okay, let's continue our tour.
Yes.
That way. Were your parents Mennonite as well?
Yes,
And were your grandparents?
yes,
Were your great-grandparents?
yes.
Were your great-great-grandparents?
Oh, I would think so.
What does Mennonite mean?
Well, it's a group that felt that the church wasn't living what they professed.
The Church of Jesus Christ.
Well, at that time, of course, it was the Roman Catholic Church.
Okay.
I'm going to admit this can be somewhat new to me. I'm not highly familiar with the Mennonite
Is it
history.
important that teenagers ask to be baptized?
Oh, they have to, absolutely.
Okay. Now, I grew up Jewish, and so I don't know anything about baptism. All I know is an adult kind of squeeze into the little baptism thing?
No.
Okay.
No, it's pouring.
Okay.
They're on their knees, and the bishop and deacon just pour a little water on their head.
I got it.
When I was baptized, along with other people within my church, it was full submersion. We did not do the pouring thing unless special circumstances called for it, like someone being paralyzed or something weird. So otherwise, we were fully submerged. I'm not sure if in old order Mennonite churches that's typically the case, but I know in my situation it was not the case. It was full submersion. And yes, what's on the screen here, baptism symbolizes the washing away of one's sin and accepting of their faith. Yes, it is true. But baptism is something broad right across Christianity. So it's not just specific for Mennonites. Many denominations within Christianity, I would say almost all of them, have some form of baptism. But they might disagree on child baptism versus adult baptism. But all across the board, there's baptism. It's not just Mennonite specific.
And two young guys recently baptized into the Mennonite church were Curvin and Warren.
Well, we brought along some Mennonite clothes for you.
Okay. And their next plan, for me, to live a little more like they do.
When I grew up, dress-wise, it's true. Old order Mennonites and more conservative Mennonites will dress very, very plain. They don't want to draw attention to themselves. They will not wear fancy things. They will not wear jewelry. They will tend to wear black and white clothing or something a little bit along those lines. As you get a little bit more liberal, they might add a little bit more color. But your old order, more conservative Mennonites will wear mostly black and white and wear those suits you saw. And those hats are very popular among the very conservative Mennonites. Honestly, I don't know what the hats serve or what's the purpose or the tradition behind the Mennonite hats. I don't know if I'll ever find out why they do that. But as far as that clothing goes, that's true. The Jew dress very plainly the more conservative you get. Again, growing up Mennonite, we weren't as conservative. Modesty was generally important to our family, especially my sister, my mom would wear skirts, they would wear long shirts, stuff like that. So modesty was important to a certain extent, but it wasn't nearly like this. We weren't quite this plain.
And what grade did you go up until?
8.
So after grade 8, you just stopped going to school?
Yeah, went home, helped my dad on the farm.
Okay.
And ending school at grade 8 is
That is rather common, actually. Within your more conservative circles, it is rather common that kids don't get further than an 8th grade education. It depends on where sectors and where they grow up and, again, what Mennonite circles you're within. But a lot of them do end up either joining their family trade, their farm, or something like that. They'll normally go up to 8th grade and then stop. Now, if they show interest in wanting to continue their education, a lot of times families will facilitate that. And again, in my case, my parents didn't graduate from high school. I ended up graduating from high school, then I went to college, graduated from college. They were they're very supportive of me going to college and stuff. And so within my Mennonite circles, there's quite a few people who went through high school, graduated from college, stuff like that. But it is true within your more conservative circles, there is this tendency to just drop out and join the trade. But it does happen that they will go to graduate from high school and go on to college. It's not just a broad writ thing, but it is rather common.
Do you have a computer at home?
No.
You don't? Do you have a TV?
No.
Do you have a radio?
No.
You don't play video games?
I have all those things at my house. And I grew up with all those things.
That's why everybody's,
there.
yeah.
So what do you do instead of playing video games?
More go and play a real game instead of just on a screen.
Like what?
Sports like baseball, soccer.
Do you have any fun?
Oh yeah, lots.
For a city boy.
Soccer and baseball. That is interesting. So, in my circles growing up as Mennonite, volleyball and softball, those were the sports. Those were the go-to sports that we played. It was volleyball and softball. Baseball and soccer were not on the tier list normally. Baseball a little bit maybe, but softball's very similar. But we played softball and volleyball. Those were the sports. Those is what you played. So I just think that's interesting. So this is Canada, Ontario. It's a little bit different.
It's a simple way of life. Okay. And as you're driving down the road in a car, you listen to tunes in the radio.
I'm going to be honest with you. Again, I didn't grow up this conservative, so we drove cars. I've never rode in a horse and buggy. I don't think once. I rode in like a horse and carriage, I think, somewhat, something like that, but I never rode in like a horse and buggy. So that is something I have never done. Fun fact.
Over 40% of all these guys are going to be going to Mennonite farms in the immediate area. And as
Small-time farming is very popular among a lot of Mennonites. A lot of my family, a lot of my friends and stuff either are or related to farmers. So agriculture is pretty big staple of the Mennonite community. And I think it has a lot to do with their more conservative history and living off the land and just being more reserved in that regard. But it is, I think, something that is slowly evolving, slowly changing with time a little bit. But it is still a rather popular thing for a lot of Mennonites to be farmers. And Anabaptists, I think, in general.
as an aside, you could not believe how bad it smells.
To see how some of these cows are actually used by the Mennonite farmers around here, I was told to put back on my Mennonite work clothes and meet Kervin and Warren at this dairy farm.
Well, we're just about to get ready to milk a cow.
I should tell you that the closest I've ever gotten to a cow is a barbecue.
I have actually been inside cow barns. They're not that intriguing. It's just a bunch of cows with straw and hay and whatever they eat, and then a lot of crap and things like that. So I've been in cow barns. I've been in chicken barns. I've been on farms. It's just very agricultural, and if you like that type of thing, great. I've helped out, worked on farms a little bit. It's not my cup of tea. I will not lie. It's not my cup of tea. That's why I'm doing YouTube. A lot of Mennonites that I know who owns farms, a lot of them have a newer technology than this. They don't normally go in with their hands. Some of them do, but most of them don't. Most of them have technology that just plugs into the udder and sucks the milk out and puts into like a big canister and stuff like that. So a lot of the Mennonites I know have better technology than this. This is a very, very, very specific conservative group in Ontario that does not represent all Mennonites. So
I'm walking through the middle of a wheat field, and you would think that since this place is huge, I mean, this is where all our pasta and bread comes from, they would have a dozen tractors to help them. They are very simple people.
And believe it or not, many of the old order Mennonites still work this land by horse and plow, and some even by hand. How hard would that be?
None of the Mennonites I know work their fields by hand or with horses. Pretty much all of them use tractors. Again, very conservative group. I do know Amish and some other denominations that are in the Anabaptist circles that do use horses and do most of their fields and stuff by hand. But many of the Mennonites I know, the ones I knew, my family growing up, had tractors, had all the equipment possible to get their farming done. They still lived very simple lifestyles, but they did have tractors.
How many of your friends know how to drive a tractor?
Probably almost all of them, 95%.
Wow.
99%.
Wow. How come?
Because we grew up.
I will say, it is very, very true that a lot of Mennonites, especially within the more conservative circles, tend to have very similar interests. Now, it's not shocking because you grew up within the same cultural norms and within the same cultural structure, but a lot of them do have very, very similar interests. Hunting, farming, they tend to be more mechanically minded, so they tend to be good with tractors and things like that. And they tend to be into the same sort of sports, like softball and volleyball in the cases that I mentioned. It is very, very true that pretty much all of them know some sort of mechanical work, know something about tractors, know something about farming, know stuff about hunting and all that jazz. So it is always just funny to me how they all do tend to share similar interests, but it's cultural.
And do you think, as a younger person, this is a better way to farm?
To be honest, I think there's a balance between the two, but I would say technology definitely helps. They're okay.
It is also, to a certain extent, true that there's some churches within more conservative circles that will, to a certain extent, demonize or even call certain technologies sinful because they fall outside of what the church deemed to be right and wrong in regard to appropriate technology. But in general, it's not normally as much of a scripture-based thing in a lot of the cases I know, as much as this is what we always did, or this is how we always interpreted these verses to mean within our cultural context. So that is normally how I hear the defense for more old traditional conservative thinking. Most of the Mennonites I know, though, embrace modern technology to a certain extent. The only technologies I often see being commonly rejected within the conservative circles that I know and I grew up around was TV and just general entertainment and smartphones and computers and stuff like that. Things that gave you access to worldly entertainment, generally speaking, would be banned by your more conservative churches because they don't want the world to influence how you think. They want you to be free from this world and not be stained by it, basically. Question for the comments is are auctions as popular within other groups? I know they do auctions in other areas and other things, but I don't know. I always just kind of grew up, all the auctions I grew up with, like farms and stuff, were always pretty much run by Anabaptists, Mennonites, Amish, stuff like that. So I always just associated auctions with my culture, but I know auctions are in other areas and other groups. I'm just curious if it's just more popular within these groups, or if I'm just thinking that to be the case because I just grew up around Mennonites.
But before you could bid on them, you had to figure out what the heck this guy was saying.
Dude, auctioneers are real rappers, let me tell you. I think rappers and auctioneers would have a fun time going back and forth.
I had one last Mennonite tradition to explore. And let's just say...
Quilting! Oh my word. Alright. Quilting is a Mennonite tradition. I honestly do not know pretty much any other conservative group besides Amish and like Anabaptists that do quilting. Like, I know there are, but it's just funny to me because quilting is a very much of within the Mennonite tradition. It's rather popular and rather common to do. My church has a quilting group. My grandma did quilting. My Mennonite friends and family did quilting. It was just, quilting was just something that was done, and normally 99% of the time was done by women. So it was, quilting has always been, but I have a few quilts myself, and I've slept with quilts. They're so warm, they're so comfortable. and they're so awesome. I love quilts, but I mean, I don't personally sleep with one anymore, but I have slept with them, and I have a couple, and they're just so nice. I love quilts. They're great.
After checking out all these unique Mennonite-inspired gifts and crafts, it was quilting time.
I will say all that you saw there with the quilts and like the art is very, very traditional Mennonite quilting style. That is exactly kind of what I always picture when I think of quilts and stuff. That type of thing. That I've seen plenty of that type of quilting, that type of design, that type of artwork. Very, very common traditional Mennonite quilting style.
Oh, I saw a fly on your hand.
Oh, thanks. Sorry.
That's so funny to me because my grandma was very conservative Mennonite, dressed exactly the same way, did quilting, stuff like that. So, and that just strikes me as something that I can see an older Mennonite woman who's more conservative. I could just see that happening. I just know some family members or some friends and stuff who are within those sort of circles that are older, and I could just see that happen. It's just funny.
Do men ever quilt or no? This is just a ladies thing.
It's a ladies thing.
It is very true. I mean, mostly women do quilt. Not many men do. I'm sure there's some men out there who quilt, and if you enjoy quilting, more power to you. I don't care. But it is true that within Mennonite circles, normally the women are the ones who do quilting, generally speaking. Generally speaking, within Mennonite circles, women within the Mennonite circles tend to be more housemakers. They tend to take care of the home, raise children, stuff like that. They tend to follow more traditional family values, if you will. And that's the case even for me growing up. Most Mennonite families I knew, there was more just these traditional family values that were around. And it should make sense because Mennonites tend to stick to a more traditional sort of tradition, or there's more conservative tradition. Again, there's a spectrum here. I fell in the middle. So some of these things are relatable to me. Some of them I just know family members who practice these things, and some of them are not even familiar with me within the Mennonite circles. We fell in the middle somewhere. There's a spectrum. So not all Mennonites are the same.
And I learned one of the most important lessons ever from these people. Stuff doesn't make you happy. The most important thing is family and faith. Now giddy up!
Okay. So that is the documentary about Mennonites. My thoughts. I'll tell you my thoughts a little bit. So, my thoughts about the documentary. He obviously picked this group of Mennonites because they are the most conservative possible, and it just makes for the most entertainment to pick the most conservative group of Mennonites. That's the first thing to point out here. Second thing is I find it funny that things that I would just consider normal is something unique to people. So like auctions, for instance. This is like something unique to him, something he's not familiar with. And I'm just like, I went to auctions so many times growing up, it's not even funny. Or things about how they dress, the hats and stuff just stood out to him. And I just knew a lot of conservative Mennonites who wore those hats all the time, and it's nothing new to me. I've been at my grandma's church where there's no like heating, there's no there's a stove, like a wood stove and stuff, but there's like no AC or anything, just fans running, and just wooden benches, things like that. All of those things are rather familiar to me. But he picked the most conservative group that ride horse and buggies, shun all technology. I know a bunch of conservative Mennonites who shun some certain technology, but not all. I don't know any that ride horse and buggies that aren't Amish. So he picked the most conservative group. That was the first thing I noticed. Second thing I noticed is just the fascination with the sort of agricultural, traditional lifestyle. Most people I know within my family and stuff grew up that way. To a certain extent, I didn't grow up on a farm, but I grew up with sort of these traditional values. So it was just always just something I always kind of was familiar with. It's just sort of how I knew life to be. And I think it's just entertaining to me to see that my heritage or family members, how they grew up is intriguing to other people. It's worthy of a documentary, and I wouldn't have thought of it, but it makes sense because I'm intrigued by other faiths, I'm intrigued by other religions and cultures, and I'm fascinated by how they live and how they learn and what they do. So it makes sense that people would be fascinated with my culture growing up, but it's just when you grow up within a culture, you don't understand why it's fascinating. But you realize that people do find it fascinating. I enjoyed it. I think it's entertaining documentary made by Parable. I think that's what they were called. So I enjoyed it thoroughly. I just think it's entertaining to see my culture being analyzed. And I think the only thing I want to make sure to get through people's heads is there's a spectrum to Mennonites. That was just the most conservative group out there. But thank you for watching. If you enjoyed what you see, like, subscribe, leave a comment. How did you grow up? What religion did you grow up with? What is your heritage? Do people find your heritage fascinating and are always intrigued by it? Let me know. And yeah, so as always, to conclude this video, I want you guys all to go out there and light the world, my friends.